So, making some great progress on making all kinds of different fresh cheeses. I'm stirring the milk for the mozzarella now. We're going to get that started. I'm waiting for the temperature to come up to 100, and it just did, which is perfect. I've shut off the heat, and now I've got to add the cultures. I'm adding freeze-dried cultures, and I've only got 2 gallons of milk, and so that's like less than a quarter teaspoon. So what I really like to do is just sprinkle it very evenly across the top. You don't need much for 2 gallons of milk. You let that freeze-dried culture, which is a powder, bloom on the surface of the milk. It needs to hydrate before you stir it in, otherwise it'll start clumping. So I'm going to wait a few minutes for that to happen. But when I add it, I need to write down the time that I've added it, because this is the first time for our make, and tracking time is the most important thing in cheese making. Okay, the cultures have bloomed on the surface of the milk. I'm just stirring them into the milk now. Just need to stir them in, and then I'll let them settle and ripen. So we call this ripening as the cultures sort of wake up and start producing the lactic acid that we depend on for making cheese. So mozzarella is a magical cheese. You can definitely make it using kits or using the industrial method, which is adding vinegar or another acid to your milk at low temperature and then going ahead to rennet, stir, drain, and stretch that curd. But we're making traditional mozzarella, which is using cultures to provide the lactic acid that makes it reach the stretch point of about pH 5.1 to 5.3. It's the same number of steps as the kits. You just have to wait for the cultures to do their things. It's a couple of hours versus about 1.5 hours or so to make the full kit. But the benefit of the traditional recipe is a rich and more complex flavor with that mozzarella. And it's so different that it's worth trying if you're really interested in mozzarella. So we've already added the cultures to this milk. We've let them bloom, stirred them in, and now we need to rennet it. I have my rennet here, and I've added it to some water because you always need to dilute the rennet. It's such a strong enzyme, it would start acting as soon as that drop hit the milk, and you need it to mix in order to get a full set for your curds. And the way we do this is we stir the milk first, and then we pour the rennet in, the diluted rennet in, while we're stirring, and then we give it a vigorous stir back and forth, not just around, because you want to mix all those enzymes everywhere into those milk proteins so that there's enzymes everywhere. That's what's going to make a nice, firm curd. You stir vigorously for about 20 seconds, 30 seconds, and then you want to calm the milk because you don't want that milk moving when you reach the flocculation point. Otherwise, the curds will be torn where the milk is still moving. So I spent about 30 seconds stirring the milk and stirring the rennet into it, and now I'm just using the spoon to sort of stop the movement of the milk. In all of about a minute, I've added, stirred, and then calmed the milk, and then we wait for the flocculation point, which, depending on the amount of rennet you used and the temperature you're at, can be from 10 to 15 minutes or so. This is the magic moment. We've got our mozzarella. It's been renneted, and now we're waiting for the flocculation point. I'm going to push the edge or the tip of this spoon into the surface of the cheese or the milk, and at some point it's going to start acting like Jell-O instead of like a liquid, and we've reached that point for the mozzarella. Now the mozzarella, then we cut the curds on a factor on the amount of time that this took to flocculate. I'm going to write that down right here. And then we wait another portion of that time, so what we call 2x flocculation, because that time to flocculation is always 1 times. So now I'm going to wait the exact same moment or exact same amount of time before I cut the curds for the mozzarella in this case. Now it's time to cut the curds. And the way I cut the curds is I use a 45-degree angle when I can get that in the pot. And we're doing about 1.5 inch curd size. So I cut down. I make sure the tip of my long knife is all along the pot, just cutting down in parallel lines at 45-degree angle. You can see a little of the cream is risen to the top, and that's what's skittering around the knife as I cut. And then you flip the knife, and I obviously have done this a lot of times, but you go on the opposite directions at, again, 45 degrees, but you essentially create a 90-degree cut. And what I'm creating here are sort of long, square logs. But you cut within the same lines. Normally, a cheesemaker would have a custom-made cheese harp that did all this very precisely, but the home cheesemaker doesn't suffer much from this technique. The last cut is straight down, but at 90-degree angle to the initial lines that I made in that first cut. And again, about an inch, inch and a half. And there we are. We're going to let these curds heal for 5 minutes. That helps the edges of the curds stiffen up a bit so that when I start stirring, they don't just crumble at the pressure of the spoon going through them. We've waited for pitching or healing of the curds for about 5 minutes. And now we're going to start stirring. And you always want to start your stir gently. And see, I'm turning the back of the spoon toward the curd and just letting it sort of naturally break itself up, and just go very slowly through this curd. Since it's actually a delicate curd, only 2x flocculation, so the proteins have not tightly locked together, but they are locked enough to make a curd. So I'll do one in one direction, and then in another direction. Try to keep the curds as whole as possible, and just push the back of the spoon through those large curds, lift it out, and then I'll wait and pause a few more minutes, let them drain a little more, let the curd edges heal a little more, and then I can make another stir. For mozzarella, we're going to stir this about 10 minutes. You can actually only stir it about 5 minutes if you want a very loose, moist mozzarella curd, or you could stir it longer for 15 minutes, 20 minutes. If you wanted a dense, hard, sort of grating mozzarella, we're going to go in between here, just stir it about 10 minutes, and then we're going to let the curds pitch and let the cultures go to work, creating that acid. We have reached the end of our 10-minute stir. The curds are definitely shrinking. I've broken up a few of them, just haven't been very careful, but it should be fine for the mozzarella, because at this point what we're going to do is we're going to pitch these curds for at least an hour, and it could be 2 or more hours, and let those cultures go to work creating the acid we need to stretch these mozzarella curds. So I've stopped stirring, cover this up and let the curds pitch, and then to keep them warm while they pitch, it's a really nice thing to be able to set them inside another pot that has some hot water in it, just to keep it around 100 degrees, because these curds, the cultures in these curds really like 100 degree, 105 degrees to be at optimal acid production. After 1 hour of pitching, I'm going to test to see if the curd is ready to stretch. I'm dipping it into 175 degree water. I'm going to let it warm up for about 10 seconds. And then I'll pull it back up, and I'll stretch it apart, but it breaks. So I stretch and it breaks. It's definitely softening up and it's relaxing, but it's definitely nowhere near stretch point. Probably another hour of pitching. All right, it's been 2 hours as pitched curd. I'm just dunking a piece of curd into 175 degree water, and I'm going to try and stretch it, but it's definitely softer, and it's stretching a bit, but it isn't pizza mozzarella yet. So we're still waiting for the culture to create enough acid so that this will just stretch as I pull. But we're getting close. All right, through these videos, I've tried to demonstrate a whole bunch of different recipes, from chev that's now draining. We've got yogurt balls under oil. We've got the paneer, which is ready to go, ready to put in your favorite curry. Our feta is draining. It'll be ready to salt and then brine maybe tomorrow. Cottage cheese, all ready. I'm already enjoying that. Starting to stretch mozzarella. And then we've got the first cheese we made this morning, yogurt cheese. It's instant, out of the bottle. Put it into a filter. I threw in some cucumber and some dill and some garlic along with salt. And we're going to have tzatziki with pita bread tonight. All this is possible. You just need to know a few techniques. All very simple, using kitchen equipment. Thermometer's important, but it's time to cut the cheese.